Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really provocative 2023 essay by Zhu Feng. It's titled, "The Structure of Human Existence Will Lead to Human Extinction." Now, regardless of where you fall on the political spectrum, you got to admit, this piece makes some absolutely massive claims. Zhu Feng is basically arguing that the very foundations of our society are fundamentally flawed, and they're driving us straight toward total collapse. Let's dig in and see exactly how he builds this case.
So picture this, a massive, heavy train just hurtling forward, accelerating faster and faster, and it has absolutely no brakes. Terrifying, right? Well, Zhu Feng uses this exact vivid metaphor to represent human society today. We are that brakeless train, speeding recklessly toward a disastrous destination. It's a really powerful mental image, and it completely sets the tone for the massive systemic critique he lays out.
Here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the brakeless train concept. Then, how desires and environmental collapse connect. Third, what he calls the traditional family problem. Fourth, the burden of nations. And finally, we'll hit his radical solution.
All right, Section 1, the brakeless train, accelerating to ruin.
Let's think about speed for a second. Right now, Earth's rotational speed is about 30 kilometers per second. But imagine if we suddenly accelerated that to 100, then 1,000, and eventually 10,000 kilometers per second. What happens? Well, the author points out a basic physical reality here. Every object has a speed limit. If you exceed it, the whole structure just tears itself apart. And he argues that human society operates on this exact same principle. Basically, we are blowing right past our structural speed limit.
Moving on to Section 2, Desires and Environmental Collapse. This is all about the speed of our society.
So, according to the text, the literal speed that's driving our society toward this inevitable breakdown is our own limitless desire. To really drive this home, Zhu Feng points to Pushkin's classic fairy tale, The Fisherman and the Goldfish. You might know it. A magical fish grants a fisherman's wife some wishes, but she is literally never satisfied. She keeps demanding more power, more wealth, right up until the moment she loses absolutely everything. The essay argues that human greed is just like that. It simply does not have a built-in braking system.
This escalation perfectly captures how the author views human ambition. It doesn't matter if you're a low-level manager or a global president, our desires just escalate endlessly. If someone manages to get their hands on $10,000, are they satisfied? No way. They instantly want 100,000, then 1,000,000, then 100 million. There's just no point of satiation. And because society is essentially just a massive collection of these endlessly desiring individuals, the society itself has no brakes.
And all of this limitless greed? Well, it translates directly into environmental collapse. Because we are constantly craving more, we end up driving this reckless exploitation of our planet's resources. We're talking rapid deforestation, boundless coal and oil extraction, severe air and water pollution, and of course, extreme weather. The core argument here is that these disasters aren't just random accidents. Not at all. They are the physical, unavoidable symptoms of a structural flaw, a society built entirely on infinite desire.
Which brings us to Section 3, the traditional family problem, the birthplace of greed.
Now, this is where the essay takes a seriously radical turn. It posits that the traditional family unit itself is the actual birthplace of human selfishness. Think about it from his perspective. Because we are biologically and socially wired to prioritize our own kin above everyone else, we naturally hoard resources just for them. Zhu Feng claims that this intense, family-centric focus inherently leads to massive global resource wastage and even social crime, all for the sake of our relatives.
So what's the alternative? Well, to really understand his point, we have to look at the communal second home model he points to, which was created by the Life Chenyun community. He claims that by removing the isolated, walled-off structure of a traditional family, you actually remove that core urge to selfishly hoard resources. The idea is that without families competing against each other, you naturally create a much more harmonious relationship between people and nature.
Okay, let's look at Section 4, the burden of nations, engines of destruction.
If the family breeds selfishness on a micro level, the essay argues that the nation-state takes it to the macro level. He doesn't view the nation as a protector. Instead, he sees it as this massive, mechanized, bureaucratic engine that's explicitly designed to fight for limited resources. In this view, nations basically exist just to compete with one another in a giant zero-sum game. And the end result? Mutual destruction.
To ground this philosophical argument in some hard data, the author highlights a pretty staggering number.
If you take global military spending, it currently equates to more than $300 per person annually. And that's for every single one of the 8 billion people on Earth. Think about that for a second. Every person's existence theoretically subsidizes this massive global military apparatus to the tune of $300 a year. And for what? Just to fund the friction between these competing nations?
And I quote here, redirecting this money towards improving livelihoods could save vast natural resources. The whole premise is that if we simply didn't have the structure of competing nation-states, we wouldn't need these bloated military budgets in the first place. If we could just use those massive funds for basic living conditions instead, the author argues we could dramatically halt our global resource depletion.
But it's not just the military. There's also the enormous bureaucratic burden. Using China as a mathematical example, the text notes that out of a total population of 1.4 billion people, there are about 80 million government officials who are supported entirely by state tax revenue. The author's argument here is that these bureaucratic roles inherently consume wealth rather than creating it, meaning they rely entirely on the wider populace to stay afloat.
So what does that actually look like in practice? Well, when you factor out dependents like the unemployed and farmers, a pretty heavy ratio emerges. It ends up taking about 5 to 6 active, material wealth-creating individuals to support the fixed salary of just one government worker through mandatory taxes. His point is that simply having a nation-state places this overwhelming, unavoidable tax burden squarely on the shoulders of its citizens.
And that brings us to our final section. Section 5, a radical solution.
So how do we stop this brakeless train? Well, the author's adamant that minor policy tweaks just aren't going to cut it. We have to completely halt our traditional path of production and lifestyle. But the truly provocative takeaway, the really radical destination he leads us to, is his demand for absolute structural dismantling. Xu concludes that for humanity to survive, we must disband all traditional families and literally eliminate all nation-states entirely.
The author wraps up his whole essay with this incredibly utopian vision. He writes, "If families disband and nations disappear, humanity can transform crisis into tranquility and embark on the road to happiness. The core idea is that only by completely dismantling these two foundational human structures, which he firmly believes are the root causes of all our selfishness and competition, can we finally step off that accelerating train and find true global tranquility."
So we're left with a really profound and challenging question to reflect on today. Is the author actually right about the structural root of our global crises? And honestly, even if he hit the nail on the head, could humanity ever truly function, let alone find tranquility, without the fundamental boundaries of families or nations? It's definitely a lot to chew on. Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I'll see you next time.